Let's try this again. Hi, everybody. Thank you for making it.
Thank you for making it.
Yeah.
This session is entitled Gitlab Has Come to Drupal.org. Maybe when I submitted it, I shouldn't have chosen such a definitive title, but we'll get to that in a second. I am mlhess. Typically when you see me, I'm wearing a hat that looks like this. This is actually the first generation hat. We have a newer hat, but I forgot to bring that. I am a member of the Drupal security team, which is why I have that hat. But today I'm not acting in that capacity, so I've switched hats to just a generic black hat. Don't read into that at all. I am also on the Drupal infrastructure team, and that's why I'm generally here today. I work for the University of Michigan. There I deal with large data involving healthcare and do some infrastructure support for a variety of schools and colleges and maintain a bunch of Drupal sites, like 3,000 of them. But we're not really here to talk about me today. So let's get a better title here. GitLab is coming to Drupal.org. And we're going to kind of dig into the history of this and how we ended up here. And then I've got some questions for the group on what they think. And then depending on timing, we can show a little bit of a demo. So let's go back in time a little bit. Let's first of all forget that we've seen this picture. So we're going to go back in time and figure out how we got here. So some history. Anybody remember the sunflower theme? Yeah. This was our initial version of a patch, and you can see it just got fixed in CVS. Anybody remember CVS? Anybody still have repos in CVS?
God forbid.
You'll notice that the person who actually did this work, their account is gone. It was deleted. These are screenshots from actual Drupal.org. The URLs are actually pretty much the same as they used to be in 2001, which is a little surprising. As we move forward, we ended up with some inline text in the page, and we were using this thing called RCS. Anybody remember RCS? So it was a way to create diffs. It worked. This was 2005. We fast forward a little bit. We're still in CVS, and we're actually using like what looks a little bit like a present-day patch for the most part. Anybody recognize this code?
Yeah, you actually would make these sorts of slides if you can make them bigger.
I have no way to make this bigger. This is 2008, and this is a commit to databases.inc. First Drupal get 'em. This is the source of that commit. Actually, all of the commits from this point on are security issues. So I guess I can put this one off to the side. There we go. That's way too heavy. So in 2011, we got the Git servers. We have our own Git servers for Drupal. We migrated all of the projects from CVS into Git. This was a quite complex project. We had, I think it was like a 48-hour outage-ish to like do this work. It was a lot of effort to get everything migrated into Git. And then we fast forward to 2018. What are we exchanging? Patch files. So, that's interesting. Here is another patch. This is to Drupal 8. And you'll see that, yes, it's going through Git, and Git is doing the patch. But we still use, for those of you in this room, I assume you know that on Drupal.org, we still use patch files as the primary way to exchange code changes.
Which sucks.
Yes, it does. So, but let's take a little bit of a look at what happened here. This was the fix for 2008-002. Everybody knows the security team releases things on Wednesday. Look at the commit time. That's not a Wednesday. So this was actually pushed to a private GitHub repository prior to the window and then published from there. That was basically to make the window go smoothly. So we used a little bit of Git, but no fancy Git. And how was it pushed to that private Git repository? Oh, we applied a patch to a code base. So on April 10th, 2008, GitHub went live. So just for some, what's happening in the open source world, we had this project go live, and it's become pretty much set the standard for how a lot of open source communities communicate and talk to each other. And so, we're still doing this, and we have merge requests. How many people use GitHub for something? Everybody in the room. How many people prefer how GitHub handles code as opposed to patch files? Nobody likes patch files? So why patches? Let's take a little bit of a history lesson again. Why are we using patches? Why does the open source community start with patches? One, they were easy, but two, the big reason is mailing lists. People used mailing lists. This is Pine. Who remembers using Pine? So Pine made it really easy because you ran Pine on your local computer, you got your mailing list mail, you downloaded your patches, and you could apply those patches easily. And that's where this came from. How many people were subscribed to one of the Drupal early mailing lists? Okay. Yeah. There's a couple of them. They're actually still out there, but not really used for much anymore. So this is 2018. In case anybody's surprised, the year is still 2018. For the past 4 years, we have been talking about how to get off of our patch-based workflow and onto something else. There have been a lot of discussions about this. And I kind of want to review some of this and then kind of talk about where we're going. We actually, as an open source community, that is really blurry, we really lead on how we do our issue workflow. Forget about the patches. The way in which we collaborate in our issue queue, the way in which we use our metadata in our issue queue is better than GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, Jira, etc. The way in which we all have the ability to contribute to a single issue is not really the common model in open source. So think about the GitHub workflow for a second. I'm looking at a product and I see an issue, and I start working on a merge request. I fork that project. I make some changes, and I submit that back. Somebody else comes along, and they want to take up where I left off. It's not quite done. Maybe tests don't pass. They have to fork my fork. They have to make changes, maybe submit that back as a merge request. Meanwhile, there's no central place to find all these forks. There's no easy place for new contributors to jump into. What we do with our issue queue makes that possible. And so one of the things that we were really careful of is not losing where we excel here. Now, you may look at this and say, this is really ugly. Sure. But it's really a jumping off point for novices to come into the project. We have this contribution credit thing. Which doesn't exist anywhere else. We have companies that are buying for contribution credit. This isn't anywhere else. And we also lead at this many-to-one collaboration, which I was talking about earlier. Now, it's not fair for me to come in and say, hey, we're awesome, without talking about where we don't do well. We run our own Git servers. We run our own Git servers, which is okay. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong in running your own Git infrastructure, except our Git servers haven't really been updated in a long time. Pretty much since they were put in. We've done the security updates and the maintenance updates to them, but they're fundamentally running the same twisted daemon that was custom written for Drupal.org when they were initially installed. They don't support current keys. They clearly don't support merge requests. They're not really what we want. And so, our Git servers. Also, code review. It works if you use the proper version of Firefox. This is a Dreditor, which is the JavaScript extension that lets you do code review of a patch inside your web browser. It works, not very well. So, we started off with this goal of adopting a developer workflow that would be familiar to people outside of our community, but also not get rid of this many-to-one collaboration that we're really good with inside of our community. We want to preserve the unique elements of how we collaborate that make the project successful, and if possible, find a partner to help us. And so, this started answering with, this led off with way more questions than answers when we kind of started laying out what we were looking for. And so we started doing what every project does, and writing, more detailed requirements. And then we ended up with this model, and this was the workspaces model. I don't know if people have seen this before. This has been around for almost the same 4 years. And the concept of that we have an issue, which would probably exist on Drupal.org, that would discuss the overall, this is what we're trying to solve, this is how we're doing it. And then you have workspaces, which may be one or more mechanisms to go about solving the problem. So, if you take a look, and I'm not going to go back to the security patches, but there's a lot of ways to solve those security issues. And we discussed internally a lot of different ways to fix the problem. Each one of those would be a workspace where we've got, 5 or 6 different code paths, and they're somewhat competing with each other. In the end, one of them is going to end up getting merged. We're not going to merge all of them. We're probably going to take the best of, all the worlds and combine them together. But at the same time, we have the one central place where we're keeping the discussion of, all these things together. And so this was brought up ages ago, and this kind of led to us to saying, well, nobody does this. Like, this is unique to us. So let's do what we always do. Let's build our own solution. So, we'll fire up that twisted daemon that we've got. That's, a bunch of Python code. Of course, we're all great Python developers, being that we work primarily in Drupal. And we'll hack on that, and then we'll have to make some type of change to Drupal.org, and I don't know, we'll get it working somehow. Except we're trying to get off islands, not create more of them. And that would certainly create an island. So then there were ideas passed around of, okay, well, we should build a new product to go into competition with GitHub. No comment on that one. So then the answer, of course, that gets thrown out a lot by the community is, well, screw it. Let's move everything over to GitHub. Just port all the projects over, import everything to GitHub, call it a day. Well, it works for some of the projects, but not all of them. It doesn't allow the many-to-one collaboration techniques. And then, do I really want to talk about left pad? Which, you delete a dependency that a lot of different libraries rely on, and all of a sudden the internet is broken. Effectively, is what happened there. We had conversations with GitHub about this. Some fairly intensive conversations with them. And one of the things that we threw out there was, well, can we run GitHub Enterprise? Which would at least give us a little bit more control over things and allow us to institute some of our own rules. Anybody run and install GitHub Enterprise? Yeah. Interestingly enough, GitHub Enterprise, you cannot leave it unauthenticated on the internet. You cannot run a repository for open source code on GitHub Enterprise. That is a requirement in their license agreement. Now, that may have changed since Microsoft bought it. So then we looked at this. And we looked at Bitbucket. And spent a lot of time evaluating Bitbucket. Bitbucket's interesting. How many people use an Atlassian tool? Any Atlassian tool? So people have familiarity with this tool. Now, I'm a little ashamed to ask this question. How many people like using their Atlassian tool? About less than half the room raises their hand to that one. What's interesting with Bitbucket, unlike GitHub and GitLab for that matter, is that it was designed to do one thing and one thing only. GitHub, GitLab have all of the features built into it, issue queues, test running, etc. Bitbucket, because Atlassian wants to sell you on other tooling, really has one feature, and that's Git repository, and they do pull requests in there, but they're really running a Git repository. If you want issues, go buy Jira. If you need CI, go buy, Bamboo. So it's a different approach. It is it's a very much like a Drupal framework, though. It has hooks. Yes, you're writing them in Java, and when I say hooks, I don't mean webhooks. You can actually write plugins for Bitbucket that run inside of Bitbucket that can do things like custom authentication. So it was an interesting product, and we actually chose it. In December, almost a year ago, we put out an announcement. The DA put out an announcement. I should be clear, I am not part of the DA. I do not work for the DA. So when I say we, I was involved on the team that made this decision, but it wasn't actually me putting out the announcement. And we chose Bitbucket. And so thank you for your time. Everybody have a great day. But then we got this. And this showed up in the queue. And this was on the announcement we put out. This was actually taken, the screenshot was taken this morning, so the 10 months ago was accurate. And we looked at this, and the first thing I did is said, let me look at the user account, look at the email address, and make sure that it's actually the CEO of GitLab. It was. And so we started talking to the GitLab folks. We had, behind these decisions and this requirements document, hang on. That requirements document, there was a massive spreadsheet evaluating every single solution. And there were solutions that we evaluated that I didn't even bring up here because they didn't meet any of the requirements. But we spent a decent amount of time evaluating all this. And so, we basically shared that with GitLab and said, this is where we are. What can you do for us? And GitLab came and they said, okay, well, let's have a meeting and talk. Now, we had reached out to Atlassian before moving forward with Bitbucket. We didn't get a response. So the fact that we've got the CEO who took the time to create an account on Drupal.org and comment to us, that was a pretty good sign. 2 weeks later, we had a meeting to discuss our concerns. A couple weeks after that, we set up a Slack group for them to communicate with us. And yeah, we've been working with GitLab. We formalized an agreement to move forward, and we're going to be doing a 3-phased implementation. And so I'm going to go through that. And really, there are 2 very well-defined phases, and there's kind of, you can kind of just throw things off to the far end here. We want to replace our Git services with GitLab. That includes CGIT, which is the front end, it's the web viewer for GitLab. We want to replace the back-end issues with GitLab, and we want to turn that loose and let people use that. What is that going to get you out the gate? That's going to get you, it's not going to get you merge requests, but it will get you inline editing if you are a maintainer of a project. And we're about 95% done with that. There's some tricky issues that we're kind of solving left that are really deep in the weeds, but most of that is functioning. Unfortunately, this means changes for Git remotes. So if you are a Drupal.org maintainer, the DA has been sending out emails telling you to change your Git remotes. Change your Git remotes. It takes 30 seconds to do it, and Drupal.org Git off is where you can go. We are going to stop. I shouldn't say stop. We're going to strongly discourage people from using password authentication. You'll still be able to do it, but we really, really want you to use SSH for authentication. It's secure, it's safer, it's better. If you're a maintainer, you're going to need to change your Git remotes when you push. If you do anything with a sandbox, the sandbox URLs are going to change entirely. So if you have a sandbox on Drupal.org that maybe is built into your build workflow, your build workflow will need to change. If you are a maintainer of a sandbox, then you're going to need to change those URLs as well. So where are we at the moment as far as testing? We basically need to get HA worked out. I worked on that this morning. It's pretty close to being ready. Syncing commit history back to Drupal.org. Surprisingly, Drupal.org does a lot of parsing of commit history and commit data on Drupal. Some of it we've decided to get rid of. And we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to just link into GitLab. There's no reason to copy the data to Drupal.org to just display a table when GitLab displays the same table. So we're going to just point over to that. Some of it is we use the syncing of the commit history for crediting and for releases. So if you are a project maintainer on Drupal.org and you push a tag, you can go to a page and say add release, and it knows what tag you've pushed, and that needs to get sunk over. One of the blockers on this was that we needed an API added to GitLab, and they've recently added that, and so we are going back through our code and testing it. One of the other things we're getting out of this is a massive update of security. If you look at our current Git code, everything basically uses PHP to shell out and run Git commands. So it's full of like exec everywhere. That's all gone. This is all using GitLab's internal APIs. And then we've got some testing to do. If we skip ahead, phase 3, looking into using GitLab CI, looking at replacing security.drupal.org, which is our bespoke issue tracker for something built into GitLab. using some of GitLab's issues, potentially looking at Mattermost, probably not going to go there, but Mattermost and GitLab have a partnership and they integrate seamlessly with each other, but I don't think we need yet another Slack, which is what Mattermost is. It's a Slack competitor. Using the project management boards that come with GitLab. GitLab has some really nice agile boards that you can use for issues. Of course, that means you've got to be using the GitLab issues. Phase 2, which will come after Phase 1, and Phase 2 is going to be merge and pull requests on Drupal.org. So some timing on this. I actually thought we would be done with Phase 1 now. That's why the title of the session was Gitlab Has Come to Drupal.org. I may have over-anticipated that. I'm really hoping, and don't hold me to this date, I don't work for the DA. I'm really hoping by the end of January we will have this ready to go. We potentially have a couple hang-ups left that need to be solved. One of them is like around tag and how tags work in GitLab. But I'm really thinking that the initial Phase 1 of this is going to be done soon. That gets us to Phase 2. Where do we want to go with this? And so I don't know how to do this. There we go. So, we've got these tooling sets together. We want the best of both worlds to some extent. And so we want to have the ability to do code viewing and review. So you'll notice that these buttons over here have changed. That's out now linking us into GitLab as opposed to trying to sync that data on Drupal.org. I can now do inline comments now that I'm on GitLab. And those comments show up in line. They send the appropriate emails. We can then get into merge requests. So we're going to create a branch within the Drupal UI, and then we can open a merge request against that branch specifically. So there's some very fancy API stuff taking place behind the scenes there, but here I am doing an inline edit to this file. I'm doing my commit changes here, and you'll notice that it's adding a, thank you for the arrow, it's adding a change into the issue itself. So my issue remains the central place. But when a new user comes along, different account, they can log in, they can go and see my example edit, and they can then edit the same file without having to make a fork. We're taking care of the permissions behind the scenes for them, and then you can see that I've just made a change there. I am apparently a new user to Drupal.org. And so this whole thing with built into Drupal, where this contributor workflow where we have multiple people working on a single issue remains. And you just saw them open a merge request. And so now there's a merge request that a maintainer gets told, are they ready to merge? And so that goes through the typical merge request workflow. And here's the maintainer reviewing the merge request. And so they have their one button press when they're ready to merge it. And they've now merged that merge request. And we see that this was all taken care of for us. So now, what's missing from this is you'd have multiple comments probably on this central issue discussing what's happening. The other thing we get with GitLab is a built-in web IDE. Thank you. A built-in web IDE. So for people who are not using PHP Storm or insert favorite IDE, how many people don't use PHP? Stop it. How many people don't use PHP Storm out of curiosity? So fair number. How many people are using another competitor product as opposed to just a command line text editor? Okay. So what's nice is GitLab will give us an IDE built into the web interface. It's probably not great for people who are doing large amounts of development, but if you're making quick changes, it is a fully functioning IDE, which is nice. To kind of clarify what lives where, Drupal.org is still going to maintain the project pages. For now, it's still going to maintain the issues. That's probably going to change at some point, or at least be able to be enabled for certain projects at some point. Do I think core will move over to GitHub issues? I'm sorry, GitLab issues? No, I do not. Do I think that smaller projects might use GitLab issues? Sure, they might. Some of the issues, some of the complications come from how do we deal with search. When I search on Drupal.org, I wanted to find all the issues. What about contribution credit? company credit, etc. But we can work some of those out. GitLab is going to be the home for code, probably test results, the web viewer, and merge requests. Which brings up some questions. Do we still need sandboxes? Sandboxes were these places where we let you create a project before you got this vetted role. That vetted role has now been given to everybody, but we've changed it so you can't create full releases until the security team has signed off on that. Do we still need a sandbox? I don't know the answers to these. If people have thoughts when we get to Q&A, it would be interesting to know what your thoughts on this are. I typically like sandboxes because it lets me put code that I don't really intend other people to use. Of course, the downside to that is inevitably people start using it. So, you know, should we be using different issue trackers for core and contrib? There are probably 10 contrib projects that have as complex of an issue workflow as core does. And then there's probably 20,000 issue contrib projects that don't have a complex workflow and would be perfectly fine on GitLab's issue tracker. GitLab's issue tracker is missing all sorts of functionality that we have on our issue tracker. You can't attach it to a version. You can't, the issue statuses are not customizable. There's no components thing. You do have a labels field, but it's just a free text labels field, so it's not nearly as useful. There, you know, I've like glossed over this concept of, you know, code versus issue. But when you actually start looking at issues, there's not two very distinct buckets. There's really three. There's things that are clearly coding issues. There are things that are clearly issues. And then there are things in the center that are like, I don't know where to put this. And so how do we figure out where this lives? How do we figure out what goes where? And that's going to be a hard discussion as we move forward. The concept of issue workspaces kind of makes that easier to deal with, but it's still it still ends up being a question of, you know, what do we put, because merge requests also have comments on them. So how do we make sure that things get synced? And I don't think anybody wants all the comments synced to all the places because that's not very helpful. So part of that is going to end up being a decision around what, you know, what standards we as the community make, and it may end up being slightly different per project. But we'll get there. The other thing that we're constantly talking about internally is, are we forgetting something? You know, Drupal.org and Drupal development are somewhat intermixed. There are a lot of people depending on things to just work the way they're supposed to work without so much, without a lot of, you know, without somewhat seamlessly, I should say. So, you know, there's a lot of complexity here, and the complexity is somewhat hidden from most people who don't see things. You know, I think of Drupal.org a little bit like an elephant, where you reach up and you grab one part of the elephant, and that's the only part of the elephant you know. And there's a whole large animal there, but if all you know is the, you know, the back leg, you don't know there's another leg, a tail, a trunk. I'm forgetting the parts of an elephant here. There's ears. Like, there's all sorts of parts to this somewhat complex invention. And you know, you can raise your hand and say, well, it shouldn't be that complex. We should reduce complexity. And I would agree with that. But we still have to have a deep understanding of the complexity to get in and reduce the complexity. And so, you know, what we're a little worried with is, are we forgetting one of the complexity things? You know, one of the things that's been discussed is, how do we deal with security issues? Right now, we have the ability, and the security team will do it, to shut down the Git repository. We shut off the Git servers effectively to do a security release for highly critical things. We call it an unplanned outage. It's planned. We know we're going to do it. But the question becomes is, we can't shut down the GitLab servers to do that, because there's so much more depending on GitLab at that point. So, you know, that's one of the things we've talked about, and that's, you know, that's an idea of what I'm talking about when I talk about the elephant here. There's a lot of processes and procedures that are built into place around, you know, very specific things that happen somewhat infrequently. But when they happen, they need to work. So we're a little worried that we are forgetting things. And so if you're looking at this and saying, well, wait a minute, what about my use case? Or I don't see how what I do is going to work into this. I'm really interested in hearing about that. Oh, I'm right on time. Amazing. So finally, what questions do people have on this? What are people thinking? Where are people's concerns? Are people excited? People not excited? Anybody want to go back to CBS? Yeah.
So currently, right now with like Composer, you can use Composer patches to be able to apply a patch automatically in your Composer file. What is that going to look like when we don't have patches anymore?
That's a great question. So Composer, we've what's his name? Thank you. Has put together this really nice mechanism to let us apply patches out of, because we use patches. My guess is you'd be applying the branch that patch would end up in. And so you'd basically specify in Composer, here's my Git remote, and here's the branch to pull that from. Yeah.
And I think GitLab is kind of like GitHub, where if you just add to the issue .patch at the end of the URL, it creates a patch file.
And it does. So you can do that too. What gets a little bit complex is if you close or remove the branch after it's been merged. And so a little bit of a live demo here, and this is not screen mirrored, so it's a little hard to see what's going on here. But we've imported all of the projects and all of the sandboxes into GitLab. They're all here. We've also sunk, all of the maintainers are all programmatically sunk from Drupal.org. Give me 1 second. Let me just do some screen mirroring for a second. So, but no, that's a good question, and we've thought through some of that. You know, the other thing that's happening is everybody has URLs to CGIT now. So there's cgit.drupalcode.org. And in fact, one of the Composer packages downloads data from that site in real time when it builds your Drupal thing, your local Drupal site with Composer. And so that is like something we've had to do a lot of work in, is like maintaining the current configuration to do that. Like if you're doing other development work using it, like you're reviewing code, which is not, you don't think about that as a Git operation, but you're still using a GitLab interface to it. So there are things we can do. We could probably mark it as a private project. These are solvable problems, but it's just we've got to be aware of all these problems to solve. So, just to give you some basic stats on this, we have 46,000 projects and 45,000 users, and those were all imported as of, I think, a week ago. So that's where this stands. Any other questions? Yeah.
Will there be a test period for certain projects to test the new workload and such?
So the upcoming deadline, which let's say January, February, or March, because clearly I can't estimate. I fail at being a project manager, apparently. But in the near future, all we're doing is really just replacing the current Git backends. When we start talking about how we're going to do the issue workspaces, I assume we will have a lot more sessions like this, as well as saying, here are some test servers, and we've made everybody a maintainer. Go have fun. And that's somewhat what we did with the initial Git migration, if I recall correctly, is we set up test servers and said, you want to be a maintainer of core? Go. So yes, we will be setting up test workflows for that. Yes?
The inline IDE piece, is that just a thing that's built into GitLab?
Yeah, let's see. It's been a while since I've used that. But I'm pretty sure, yeah, Web IDE. And so it shows me all the files that are in my project. I can go and I can make changes to those files. It's going to show me that there are changes in the files on the side. I can edit this API thing. It looks like it's doing code completion here, although apparently not in PHP. And then when I'm done, I can do one commit with all of that data. It shows me what's changed. I can write my thing, and it's going to prompt me here, am I committing this or making a new branch? So it lets me do this right in line. It's not going to be a tool that's going to replace, hard, complex development where users would typically use an IDE, but it may be a tool that people use to make quick changes to their code base with. Yeah.
So the screenshots you showed us for create a workspace, is it just creating a branch?
Yeah.
What happens if somebody creates a branch first?
If somebody creates a branch first. So we
They first
probably
go to GitLab, create a branch, and then want to create an issue.
So my guess is that we're gonna hook into this so that if you're a maintainer, you could do that. But you know, what normally the workflow is you as a user of a project, not the maintainer, I say I have an issue, just like you do now, and here's my problem, here's my, here's what I want to change, and here is my patch. And rather than just uploading a patch, you would start with the branch, because you won't necessarily have access to create a branch on a project that you are not a maintainer of.
Okay.
If you're a maintainer, then you can do a lot of things. We may also block the ability to manually create branches so that we can keep track of them in a database. Some of this we haven't quite worked out exactly what process we're going to take on that, but I think that we, right now we're going to probably, the idea is that it's going to flow through an issue. And there may be an ability for projects to say, no, just let us use these, we're just going to use these, the GitLab issues.
Because many times, like, you work locally and you find a bug and you create a branch and you want to push it and then you want to create an issue. Like, that's how a lot of times in GitHub, at least I work. So, but yeah, if you could just block that and that you need to first create an issue, that would always resolve. So
if we turn on, and I'm going to have to reimage this server when this is done, but that's okay. So, the issue interface in GitLab compared to what we have is somewhat lacking. And that's why we're kind of thinking through this. But there are smaller projects where, this Cosign project, which is a authentication system used by probably 6 colleges in the world, would be fine to use the GitLab issue workflows. We have maybe 10 issues a year, if that. Whereas views, Path Auto probably don't want, want something a little bit more flexible than what this provides. Yeah?
Is there a single authentication system? Would it use Drupal.org?
Yep, so there's a couple things we've done with that. So we're using, and it's labeled JWT, but it needs to change. We've built a JWT provider for Drupal.org to do authentication into GitLab with. That'll change. We're probably going to get rid of the actual password authentication screen there. And we're debating figuring out a way to do single sign-on. JWT doesn't directly support single sign-on, but we can make things work by doing some complex JavaScript and HTML, and I don't do JavaScript and HTML well, so. But we can load that JWT login endpoint on login to Drupal.org to effectively log you into both. Right. So that's what we're talking about doing there, so that it will be more of a seamless experience. Hopefully you never see this page. That would be the goal. Yeah.
So, like the current workflow for security release, I got to give some background information, is that only stable releases of modules get security reviews. And I'll throw out, like, the way the ad hoc security system works, it's like you have like private patches that only specific people can access, which I think is completely legitimate, appropriate, correct. I want to emphasize, I'm not criticizing that workflow. But there's this fundamental issue, including myself, we're guilty of this, we're not at stable releases. I'll put rules out there as another example where these modules have some security issues that happen every once in a while, and there's not really a workflow to create a private branch. Like, I would benefit from being able to see an issue and be like, wait a second, this PR, everything going on here needs to go private, where only a few people can look at it and we can, resolve the issue without getting the security team involved would be beneficial. It's like even certain code, it's tricky with open source because you're basically saying, while doing open source development, we want to create some private branches.
So, let's switch here a little bit. You can actually do that now. Nothing stops you from going to securitydrupal.org, creating an issue there, and asking a security team member to invite the other maintainers to it, and just right in there, it's not going to get covered, but you want a place where you can work on this in private. Like we will facilitate that for you. Just make sure you're clear when you create the issue that you understand that we're not going to facilitate the security advisory. Depending on how bad the issue is, we may be convinced to flag it as a security release. We don't quite have a workflow, like a defined workflow around that. It feels weird at times to flag private projects as security releases. What we're basically saying is that you're not going to get the volunteer time of the security team to get involved, help review patches, and coordinate that disclosure if you haven't flagged your release as stable. How do I say this? There's a lot of stable releases that are less stable from a usability standpoint than a lot of projects that don't have stable releases. So part of this is what is your minimum viable product to make something labeled stable? And even if even if you release a stable branch that has 100 known issues, the parts that are that you're not saying are known issues are still stable. So part of this is to encourage stable code. And that may mean changing, because in a developer's head, it's not stable until everything is perfectly working. Well, perfect is the enemy of good. So, I would encourage people to release modules as being stable as long as the core functionality is functioning. And if it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, okay, we can add those later.
Okay, I'll let you keep your hat on for one more. Keep hat on. This is an important one too. Is like I'm maintaining web form. I have a specific request which I'll come to the security team, but since you brought it up, it's a really simple one, is when a module goes from RC to stable, that should I'm on getting the mindset that should automatically be considered security. Like that should be flagged out in the update to everyone to say, you need to update to this stable release. You're not running a stable release. Fundamentally, there's security, there's an issue. You're running code that's not fully supported. I mean, I'm not sure, but that's where I'm leaning toward, where I need that.
So
get everyone up to the same point.
And I'll bring that up with others. We've got Ben here who. Do you have your hat?
I don't. We all swap, yeah.
We can talk about it offline.
Well, no. So my initial response to that would be something along the lines of, I want to be careful raising that security warning flag. Mm-hmm. If you say, look, I'm taking this thing from RC to stable, and I am fixing a critical security issue in it while doing that, yes, we should flag it. Yeah. But if it's, hey, I had 100 lines of code, and I've decided that, other than this documentation, it's now stable.
I'm looking at a throttle of when you have 50,000 people who are using alpha and beta code.
That's a different story. Yeah, that is a different story.
Yeah, I agree with that, because from a Drupal builder point of view, we have contracts with clients that say if it's a security release, we have to upgrade within X amount of time, and if it's not really a security release, I would fol bad that you make me laugh.
Yeah. So it's not there.
I mean, if you've got rules that is a non-stable version, and you're taking it to be stable, you could probably convince us that, especially if you fixed something that was a security issue in taking it stable, then absolutely we would be willing to flag that and probably do an essay on it. But I wouldn't want to just automatically, we could programmatically flag everything, and I think that would be...
No, I'm not there. Yeah. It's this underlying issue of how do you maintain the security outside of the normal stuff.
Any other questions, apparently, for either hat?
I was wondering how you're going to do things like the RTBC and marking issues. Is that going to be in a label, or?
And that's one of the reasons why using this for issues doesn't quite work as smoothly, because it doesn't have that clearly defined labels that we're used to. Also, where does RTBC belong? On the issue itself or on the code branch that we're going to commit? There's a gray area there. So I don't think we've quite figured that out. My guess is what's going to happen is core is going to adopt a workflow, and projects may adopt another workflow. The cosign project, for example, there are so few people who are using this, we can just close the issues when we're done. That's enough. Just mark them closed. With core, you're going to, there's multiple levels of review, and one of the things we may get to is how can we actually work in that review system so that there's, a mechanism to follow. Yes?
Can you talk a bit about the CI?
So, yeah. I'll go back to this one. GitLab CI is a pretty cool process that's built on YAML files and has what they call CI runners that run multiple different, that can run on multiple different platforms, including they will basically own your Kubernetes cluster as part of what they're doing. So GitLab has built into it the ability to say, when I create a branch, spin up my website, download my data, and check out this source code, and then give me the URL to play with. And it will build all of that behind the scenes in Kubernetes and handle all the routing and the ingress controllers and everything. I think that there's a lot of work that we've put into Drupal CI itself, and so I think the discussion currently is to have GitLab CI fire off the containers for Drupal CI, mostly because there's a lot of reporting that happens around Drupal CI and how we do that data. GitLab CI is pretty much did it pass or did it fail, and Drupal CI has a lot more information that comes back. But this is a phase 3 topic. I don't actually know where we're going to be with that, to be honest. I don't know where that's going to end up. I could see, in one scenario, I could see us doing exactly what we do with Drupal CI now, but just using it, firing GitLab CI to trigger Drupal CI, basically replacing Jenkins, which is currently doing a lot of that heavy lifting. I could see us saying, look, if you're a contrib project, we'll open up some CI resources for you to use GitLab CI for, because Drupal CI may be overkill. I don't know where that's going to end up. There's a lot to explore in that capacity. My guess is that we've got the Drupal CI is very specific to the Drupal workflow, and porting that over to the GitLab format may or may not be doable. So I'm guessing we're going to end up with some version of Drupal CI still running, but I don't know, honestly.
But could projects create their own CI YAML file, or is it disabled?
At the moment, it's disabled. I think the question would be would we want to provide either our own runners for projects or let them provide a runner for their own code? I'm a little bit anti the second option, just because if that runner disappears, things stop working, but you could convince me either way. Any last questions? Because I think I'm getting the nod from my room monitor that I need to shut up.
Can you switch hats one more time? Just for fun.
Thank you, everybody.